Okay, all set. All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to see all of you here. Thank you for making the time to be here. My name is Chad Van Buskirk. Danielle in programs asked me a month or 3 ago if I would be interested in giving a talk on, I think it was like story writing or narrative writing. And I said, no, it's the summer. I was like, we have to talk about gardens. I was like, I do that all the time during my day job during the academic year. So I live here in Bowling Green. My sort of day job, August through May, I'm an English faculty member at BGSU. But during the summer and during the time throughout the rest of the year when I'm not in my office, I really identify first and foremost as a gardener. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about that. The only thing longer with more spaces than my last name is probably the titles of my presentation. So it's a mouthful, but we're going to talk about gardening for wildlife in an easy and affordable way. Take a deep breath. How to make your outdoor space a haven for birds, bees, and butterflies without breaking the back or the bank. Hopefully, yes. Right, exactly. Hopefully on both of those things. Oh, looks like our clicker may have broken its back. Let's see here. Oh, we're good. Okay. All right. So just to give you a quick preview of what we are going to get through in about the next 40 minutes or so. We'll talk just a little bit about what is wildlife gardening, or why should we be interested in that. I'm going to tell you just a really short story of my kind of journey or experience gardening the patch of land that I've been on for about the past 11 or 12 years. We'll talk about the 4 core needs that all wildlife share. So things that if you are either a gardener currently or you hope to get into that, these are things that you want to be mindful of and be sure your space provides. We will talk about a few things to avoid in the wildlife garden. And instead of thinking that as a tisk, don't do this, I think of it more as a what can I get away with, not doing, how can I make this easier for me? We'll then talk a little bit about kind of how to get started with this, maybe a few ways to kind of recalibrate your thinking, maybe in some cases, what you might have learned about gardening growing up. I know I had to certainly do that a little bit. We'll talk about then specifically the hows and whats of wildlife gardening. What is it you should in fact do? And then because in a perfect world, I would be giving this presentation in my own garden. You all would be over. Paul would be there serving like cookies and cake, and we'd have lemonade or something. Unfortunately, we don't have that. So in addition to bringing a few specimens from the garden, I'm also going to then show you a few pictures, a bit of a slideshow of what the garden looks like. And then Clara will make me stop talking if I'm still going at 10 or quarter after so that we have time for some Q&A. Okay. So a few guiding questions here. So first of all, I'm curious, how many in this room, how many of you would call yourself a gardener? Or how many of you have a garden at home? Okay, you're my people. Okay, so about 3/4 of you at least, okay? All right, and hopefully some of you at home on Zoom too. Okay, so I always just like to think about, and we don't actually have to, we can treat these as rhetorical questions here, but why is it we garden? Or what does it mean to garden for wildlife, right? What do we think? What do you think of when you think of gardening, or what does it actually mean to garden? A lot of times I'm in different groups of people and gardening is purely a row of vegetables, or vice versa. Gardening is purely a bed of zinnias, and that's what that means. What do we mean by wildlife? That can, I use that as a very positive term or something that I have an affinity for, but that can also sometimes be unsettling. I was talking to a neighbor the other day who said over her fence, we have an opossum in the neighborhood. And without letting her finish, I said, oh, that's wonderful, good, great, like things are working. And I quickly realized she was not so happy about that kind of wildlife, but I was thrilled. So I quickly tried to sell her on it. And how is this type of gardening different from any other gardening? Does it have to be, etc. So having spent quite a few years reading about gardening, having been a gardener, I started making a list too of like, why do I garden? And I realized the list was kind of long here. We do it for relaxation, at least I do. It can be physical work, so it can also be physical well-being. I try to keep a bit, flexible and in shape there. Again, kind of emotional well-being. Some people view gardening as activism. That is, this is their way of doing good in the world. Building community with your neighbors. How many times have you met maybe a new neighbor by complimenting them on their daylilies or exchanging, divisions of roses or things like that? Nutrition, we grow food to eat, we garden to eat. Reciprocity, to kind of build a deeper relationship, maybe with the natural world. Solace, and as we'll see in a minute here, I think also the world depends on it. We need this. More recently, I've really leaned into that notion of solace and relaxation and emotional well-being. Again, I don't have to tell any of you, we were all here for it. Going through the pandemic, I was probably about 8 years into my garden then and never realized I would need it as much as I did during that difficult time. A picture here is of my husband and two of our very close friends the summer of 2020 when we were using that garden. That was how we kept in touch with important people in our lives. So that was an important space. It's also, as I said, a place for solace. When I first moved to this garden, my mother had passed away unexpectedly about 10 months prior to that. And without realizing it, I found that across the first couple years after her death, that really became an important place for me to grieve and to heal and things like that. And again, just a place to relax and meditate. We have a basset hound at home who's really the deep thinker of the house, and she uses that space to, right? She's thinking all those deep houndly thoughts, right, about what is the meaning of life out there. And again, a place to rest. I'm in our hammock, any sunny day that we have. It can again be a place to meet new friends. Last year, I had entered some flowers in the Wood County Fair Flower Show. Come see us next week. And the day after the show, I came home to a note written on the back of a marathon gas receipt from a neighbor saying, "We've seen your flowers at the show and came and found your garden. We want to have a tour." Long story short, a week later, they're coming over for tea, and I now have two new friends in the community. So lots of reasons. And so, like I said, I'm long-winded. You'll pick up on that quickly. So a definition of wildlife. How about a paragraph-long definition? So when I talk about wildlife, what I mean here is this is something that creates habitat of any scale. And I want to stress that because you do not have to have a quarter of an acre in-town lot like I do. You could have a balcony. You could have a porch. You could have acres. But of any scale through purposeful choices of land management. So I'm thinking here about what type of plants are we choosing to put in the ground and nurture? How are we maintaining our soil? What are we building? What kind of build space is there? What are we doing with our waste? How are we handling pests, or who are we identifying as pests? That meet the needs of essentially any non-human animals, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, arachnids, all of those. And many gardeners seek to attract and support these wildlife indigenous to their area, and often because the animals, again, that opossum that I talked about, yes, I know it can be problematic, and they're kind of they've got that kind of drunken old man. But they are native to our area. They eat a whole lot of ticks. They keep Lyme disease down, and they're losing habitat like crazy. And this is not the same possum, but this is a possum from a few years ago who I used to see on my back fence every night, who I love, right? Yeah. But lots of people depend on us. Opossums who are running out of habitat. If you are a fan of the monarch butterfly, you will know that they are deeply, deeply imperiled. Each year, their global populations continue to drop. But let me talk a little bit about the need let me just show you a couple quick pictures about why wildlife gardening is so important. And I would encourage each of us to do what we can here. I'll jump over, and I think the website is maybe already pulled up, minimized, if you're able to pull up Chrome. Perfect, yep. Steal this for just 1 second. Yeah. So I just want to very quickly, I won't show you all the images here, but a couple years ago, the New York Times put together a study, and it's a visual study. And what they've done is taken aerial photos of several different communities across the United States, usually somewhere in the range of about a 5 to 10 year gap or span in time. And like I said, I won't stop on all of these, but I just wanted to show you what a couple of these look like. And I'm going to skip over the text here. But just to show you how much, so this is, I think, Loudoun County, Virginia. And across a several year time span, this is how much green space and space for wildlife we are seeing disappear. This is Dublin, California, 2009. And I believe this was, again, just a few years ago, maybe 2018. Okay, we'll just look at one or few others. Yeah. This is Katy, Texas. Again, lots of green space. Ergo, it was a lot of it looks agriculture, but there was some forestation over there on the right. Here's where we are today. Last one here. If any of you are snowbirds, the villages, some of you may know this. Again, this was 2007. And here we are today. Okay. So, and there's several more there. I'm conscious of time, but I just wanted to show you that. And then if we can jump back to the, thank you. I think we can jump ahead here. So those are just a few visuals, not to, we're jumping all over here. Okay, and come back for me. We're almost there. We're going to land this. There we go. Okay. So I just, those visuals, I think, speak much more than I could get out here in the next 10 minutes of just how much, again, quote, wild space is disappearing. Obviously, we humans need a place to live as well. As a country, we have an enormous housing crisis. But I also want you to hold that kind of in tandem in your mind of just how much space for the non-human world we're losing. Doug Talmy, the author of a book you'll hear me mention several times this morning, reminds us that every week in America, we are mowing, we have 40 million acres that we are mowing to a 1-inch size, roughly 8 times the size of New Jersey. And I don't know about you, but when I go out, when I've just mowed my lawn, there's really not a lot of life there. Like that's not a lot of habitat for folks here. And I think it's also just speaks to the fact that generally as a society, we tend to be pretty divorced from or removed from a lot of the knowledge of what wildlife can look like. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of the really wonderful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, has mentioned, it worries me that today's children can recognize close to 100 corporate logos, but maybe fewer than 10 plants. And I would say probably 15 years ago, I was not far away from that either. There were not too many I knew. And it's also important as we garden for wildlife, it helps us learn more about this, more than human community. Here is a picture of a little guy. Several years ago, I was taking a nap in the summer. I was on the couch in our house, and I wake up and I look over on the arm of the sofa, and there's this little guy crawling. Okay? Yeah. Now, the 5-year-old me, or my mother at any age, would have seen that, screamed, and then squashed that thing or grabbed a tissue. Yeah. Thankfully, though, by the time I saw this, I did not do that. My first response was, oh, wow, I've never seen this before. Who could this be? So I take a picture and I scoop this little guy onto an index card, do a little bit of Googling, and I realize, oh, that's the caterpillar of the 8-spotted forester moth. Wow. And it grows on, that caterpillar eats Virginia creeper, a native vine, which can also be a little bit of a thug, but was growing up a corner of our house. So I was like, okay, so probably the dog probably brushed it and it got on her coat and in she came. So I did not squish it. I took it back outside, put it on the plant, and eventually it became one of these folks. Okay. So that's just kind of the context here, what I mean by gardening for wildlife. I will add just a quick disclaimer. I am not an absolutist. I also know that there are many roads that lead to Rome with just about every endeavor. So there are many ways and many degrees or areas on the spectrum of wildlife gardening you can inhabit. What I'm going to talk to you about today is just sort of what I've done, and you can take from it what you will. All right, so how did I get here? All right, so the ancient philosopher Cicero, one of his famous quotes that people loved, especially we introverted book nerds love to quote, is if you have a garden in a library, you have everything you need. I absolutely believe that. That might go on my tombstone someday. But I would need to add, of course, you also always need a dog. You have to have a dog, right? Yeah. Okay, so here's where we were. So I came to the property where I currently garden roughly 2012. Little bit of an asterisk. I happen to know that property for about a year or so, but I wasn't really there full time. But we'll say 2012 for a starting point. And this is roughly what it looked like. It was pretty much a blank slate. We are this very odd, off the street, but still downtown property. And pretty much, so, and it's also a very weird orientation. Here's our house, our driveway kind of cuts through the middle, and then we have this big lot. The point for you is, it is pretty much nothing but turf grass. There's a row of about 20-foot arborvitae. There maybe were some irises, nothing. It was desolate. And so that's what I started with. I very much still consider myself a novice, I will say that, but a curious and invested and interested one. So when people say, oh, I don't know anything about gardening, I say you're the perfect candidate because you learn by doing. Be humble, don't let failure get you down. I'm still very much constantly learning. Do I know a lot more than what I did in 2012? Oh yes, piles, but still learning so much every time I step out the door. In 2015, I completed OSU Extension's Master Gardener program. Has anyone been through that program? Okay, well, yep. I highly recommend this. Do not let the name Master Gardener intimidate you. It is for interested, curious novitiates like myself. But I just learned piles. It's a really wonderful program. It's about 15 weeks. You go once a week for about 3 hours, two or 3 hours. Learned about botany, soil, pruning, pathogen, propagation, all of that. But I would say one of the most important things I took away was the week we learned about native plants and the roles they play in ecosystems. And that really got me thinking, okay, what's this connection between the decisions I make as a gardener, how that impacts how healthy my ecosystem is this a way that I can do good, and also learn more about the world around me? Because again, I didn't know many plants. I also read as much as I could about wildlife gardening. And there's many books that I read. I would say if I had to pick out 4 that are probably the most helpful or important for anyone wanting to get into wildlife gardening, it is these. And I can also talk with Clara about making these available afterwards as well, but you're welcome to grab a picture. Doug Tallamy's Bringing Nature Home is, this might be my autograph copy because I'm that much of a fanboy. Yep, it is. Okay. If I had to pick a single book that if you have not read but should, if you are at all interested in wildlife gardening, this is it. Okay? This is your closest thing to your wildlife gardening Bible. This should be your holy reading, right? But shortly after that, Sarah Stein's Noah's Garden, Restoring the Ecology of Your Own Backyards. She wrote this probably 15 years before Doug Tallamy. This was a woman and her husband who in late 80s, early 1990s, with her husband, restored a property, I think it was eastern Pennsylvania. It had been built up as a development and it was pretty much dead aside from houses. And it's just a beautifully written book of her experience over the years, adding a garden here, putting in a small pond, planting these trees, and watching all of the life that slowly comes back to the region. And I won't summarize each of these, but again, just really, really good reading. And these gave me a foothold for, okay, this is what I want to try to do with our property. But again, that was 2015, 2016. By that point, I had been gardening like a lot of us. I got busy dropping things in the ground. And a lot of them are wonderful plants, beautiful plants, almost all of which are still growing in my yard. Okay? There's no bad plant. I lie. I'm going to talk to you about a few bad plants. But these are not bad plants. They're things that my parents, my grandmother, others own. You know, I will always grow hostas. I will always have peonies. I will always have a mock orange and lilacs. You know, these are important plants. But I quickly learned that while they're great for me, and they hold important memories, and who doesn't love the scent of lilacs? They're not necessarily really pulling their weight in terms of what they could do for the environment. So what did I do? I started by planting just a few small native perennials. I was learning about what those were, and I would remove others really only if they died, or if I learned that they were one of those few plants on the really, really naughty list, really aggressive ones. We started fencing in that really big yard, primarily for the dog who you saw a moment ago. And that left us with a pretty long, about 50-foot, 6-foot strip between that driveway and the rest of our large yard that I turned into a mostly native pollinator garden for only about $50 worth of plants and the cost of a few bags of cypress mulch. So it was pretty good. A year or so later, I then expanded that. So originally I was talking about this space way over here along that fence row. We had this patch of grass between our fence and our alleyway, which is always a mucky mess. It holds water all spring. There's not much you can do with it. And then it bakes all summer. We turned that into roughly about a 5 by 20 foot native meadow. And then again, throughout the rest of the yard, I just very slowly started adding more beds, sneaking in more plants. And really got sneaky sometimes, because every time Paul would say there was enough, I was like, okay, sure, that's fine. And then, for example, here is the tulip poplar that I sneakily planted among his elderberry hedge, and by the time he saw it was too late. So that was good. But yeah, so that's what we're doing. And now here we are. I am not kidding. And this was summer of 2021. Because like a lot of people during summer of 2020, the worst of the pandemic summers, perhaps maybe the worst, however you want to define it, but the first pandemic summer, we went in lockdown in March, which my fellow gardeners, that was a nightmare, because that's about the time we're ordering seeds or planning to go to the April and May plant sales, right. And suddenly we can't do anything. All of this, I wish I had a before picture. This was all grass here, obviously, except the tree and maybe one tiny shrub here. This was all grass. And 2 weeks before lockdown, we had covered all of the space where there are beds with the newspaper, cardboard, and we got a load of mulch from the dump. So we had it all set, we had it mulched, and it sat there for 2 months, and then it's time to plant, and oh goodness, we can't get to sales. And even though you could still find plants and there were outdoors, but like a lot of us, we thought, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to spend, I'm keeping my budget tight. I don't want to spend a lot on plants, not knowing what we need to do. So with one or two exceptions, nearly everything that you see in this bed was a free volunteer. I made sure that I did not weed summer of 2020 and let things grow up till I could see, oh, that's a coneflower. Oh, that's a bergamot. Dug that up and moved it. And then a year later, this is summer 21 now, this had grown in. Awesome. So we saved our bank, definitely. And because they were small, I wasn't breaking my back either. And so this is that alley side, the boggy place that is also where we have our way station sign for others to see. I'm going to start flying because I'm going to talk my way into a 3-hour lunch here. But this is where we are. This is where we are. Now, this is because these are winter pictures. By the way, if you ever want to see aerials of your property, if you don't know, you can go to the Wood County Auditor's website, look up your property, and you can look at these from year to year. So it's not as dramatic in the middle of winter. I think this was like November and March or something, but we're also looking at it from different angles. This is from the south, this is looking from the north, but you'll see how much green space and biomass we've been able to add to our lot there. And then again, full disclosure, I said to somebody coming in, I kill plants all the time, so don't beat yourself up. Yeah. So everyone says I don't know anything about gardening. I'm afraid I'll kill things. Oh, you have to. And when you kill them, guess what? More plants. So great. But the interesting thing here, with one exception, the exception being the butterfly bush, everything that I have killed here is non-native to Wood County. Just saying. Just saying. And the butterfly bush, I was killing that because I was planting it in our swampy area and it really doesn't like wet feet. So I learned a little bit about that. But so the nice thing about that, like I said, you have to experiment. You will kill things will die on you, it happens. But the nice thing is if you approach this really with the approach of, all right, what can I learn or how can I be surprised? You will always be surprised here. Margaret Rankle, who has a great autobiography of both her family kind of set against what she's, the garden that she's lived with for years, has this great quote. I love it. The flip side of ignorance is astonishment, and I'm good at astonishment. So yeah, I may not know all the answers, but I can always be surprised. So whether it was coming back after being away for 2 weeks years ago and finding that my wild bergamot had shot up 3 feet, or learning that there's a reason why they call it giant sunflower, and you're looking at a 12-foot plant there. But you can then get down close at eye level too. Like I found myself, especially the last 2 years and during the pandemic when I could go nowhere, I was down on my tummy in the garden and I would see things like, oh, there actually are monarch caterpillars eating my butterfly milkweed. So yeah, you get up close and personal with it, right? Learning that peck skippers are actually pretty easy to tame. They will come and sit on your finger if you're still long enough, or especially if you're hot and sweaty and have been working in the garden. I don't know if it'll play. Are you able to hover, Clara, over this video? There's an embedded video. Yeah, okay. So for those of you who say you're scared to death of bees, and I promise I sympathize with you and I'll tell you a story later. The nice thing about so many of our native bees, whether they're carpenter bees or miners, with so many of these plants, they couldn't give a darn diddly that you're standing there. They're like, they are here, like, this is me in the Ben and Jerry's aisle at Kroger. Like, don't try to come to me. Like they've got the good stuff here waiting to enjoy. So, so lots of cool stuff here. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, but now down to business. Since I've only got 15 minutes left, I knew this would happen. All wildlife require 4 basic things. Okay, so with your mental mind, your mental camera, snap a picture of this. Okay. Food, water, shelter, and resources to raise their offspring. Surprise, surprise, that's probably not very different from what you and I need, right? We need to eat, we need to drink, we need a place to shelter, and if we have children, we've got to find a way to keep them alive. Food, all sorts of food, right? Flowers, fruit, bees in the New England aster, or the pawpaws growing in our backyard. You do not have to provide all of these things. The more you provide, the more people will come. The more folks, the more non-people will come. Nectar, berries and fruits, foliage, the leaves that you provide, and of course bugs. Don't panic when you see those caterpillars and spiders. That means you're doing something right. I know. But the good news is there will be creatures coming to eat them. Nectar, of course, this is probably pretty familiar. Every time you see a butterfly on one of your flowers, they are drinking nectar that's available. And this is some Joe Pye weed that we plant purposely right near our front door so that all July and August, when we pass through it, we have a good chance of seeing some swallowtails hanging out there. Lots of food and berries, and the nice thing is many of them are beautiful. Spice bush, which if any of you hike through Winter Garden Woods, is way back in the back of St. John's Woods. They get these beautiful red berries that the cardinals love. Red chokeberry, I think, is one of the most beautiful native foliage shrubs, but also is loaded with berries that the robins eat every February when they are freezing. A terrible picture, but I just had to show you, our neighbors have a native box elder tree that gets those awful little winged nutlets, but the squirrels love that. So for about 3 weeks in late fall, they're eating that and not trying to get at my bird feeder. Spice bush, which I just showed you another picture of, is very beautiful in fall. This brings a specialty swallowtail to town. Aphids on your milkweed, spiders hiding in there. These are all things that birds and others will eat. If any of you are squeamish, you might want to close your eyes for just a moment, but remember there's predation. So animals eating other animals. So every winter the hawks come in from the woods, and while I hate to see my songbirds go, raptors got to eat too. So the Cooper's hawks have to eat, And, you know, they're part of the neighborhood too. So I just wish they would eat the European starlings and not my black-eyed chuncos. But, you know, what can you do? So many ways to provide food, and you see how easy that was. A lot of those are just plants. You put the plant in the ground, the right plants, the native plant, and you're providing food. Water, lots of different forms here. It doesn't have to be anything special. If it's moving, that's great, but it doesn't have to be. This is a really great sort of poolless in-ground fountain near where my father lives down in Kenton, Ohio, at the Friendship Garden there. You can put in tiny little ponds. This will break the back, so hire somebody. I learned that the hard way. I dug that myself, and it's the only pond I will ever dig, but it's paid off. Or tiny little things. It's not a great picture here, but even having small receptacles where you can put stones and just have a little bit of water. Butterflies will come and drink from that like they would a mud puddle. Cup plant, which I have a small selection of here. This is a native perennial, gets really tall if you want something in the back of your garden. It is shaped, like its name suggests, as a cup, and every time it rains, it holds water there. And you'll see goldfinches come and drink from that, butterflies, other birds. Yep. All right, so we have food, we have water, shelter. I don't have pictures of this because I thought this is maybe the most obvious. Also, I need to do a better job of getting some good pictures. But shelter, so obviously protection from the elements. Not a picture, but this will work. Bee and butterfly houses are all the rage. You know, you can gift these to somebody for their summer birthday or Christmas or something. But these are wonderful. These are places where solitary, which solitary is code word for non-aggressive, so no need to fear. But solitary bees will come and lay their eggs in that. They can overwinter. We tend to put this in our unheated garden shed over winter just to keep it dry from the snow. Set that back out in March, and you have a new generation. But it doesn't even have to be that complicated. Just leaving your leaves where they fall or brushing them gently into a corner of the garden. You can get really fun and artsy if you've got kids, grandkids. You can do the whole thing of stacking bricks and twigs and just making nooks and crannies for things to live in, and planting densely with your shrubs. Birds need to make nests. Many of them. And so when you're cleaning up in spring, again, trying actually not to clean up too much or don't throw all that away. Every year when I let it stay up all winter, but when I rip up the daylily leaves, I usually throw those in a corner of my vegetable garden, and the robins are always using those to make their nests. Things along those lines. Having some bare earth or wet mud where insects can get to that. I won't read you this whole thing, but you can kind of skim this as I go along. Part of the reason this is so important when we think about raising their offspring is, you know, I should say I've never raised a child. I'm not a parent. I'm an uncle. I've watched lots of others. You know, human babies look like a lot of work, no doubt. My non-human dog baby was enough work that 10 years later, I still never want to have a puppy again. But you know, mommy and daddy birds, they've got it pretty rough here, right? So one study showed it takes 390 to 570 caterpillars per day, not total, per day, to feed a growing clutch of 4 to 6 chickadees. So they've got to be zipping in and out like crazy to get food. So the more we can provide, the better here. This was a video I shot a couple years ago out my living room window. This is a family of 3 house wrens and a mom or a dad, one of the parents, flying off and feeding them while they sit on the fence there. And I timed it roughly, and from visit to visit, she was averaging about 35 seconds. Every 35 seconds, she's running away from babies, has to find food, which typically, again, is more abundant on those native plants, and then getting back to feed them. And obviously, she needs to make those trips quickly because she's got a lot. She's got a lot of worms to find and caterpillars, but obviously doesn't want to be away from those babies for hours on end while she's out looking for food, because then things could happen to them. Leaving hollowed out plant stems, making those available can be really helpful. So when you cut down your plants in the fall or the winter, leaving about maybe 12 inches or so of those up. And again, having native plants where this is an up close of a milkweed plant, and that tiny little clear piece there is a monarch caterpillar egg. And that monarch butterfly can only leave her eggs on a milkweed, right? So think as if any of you have had children, think of it as like the doctor told you, you can only lay your baby down on a blue blanket with green checks and red circles, and it can only be found at Target, and only, you know, there's only 4 of them there, and you're fighting against 50 other parents. That's kind of what's happening when insects come to our yard and all they see are hostas and grass. There's nothing they can use. A silver-spotted skipper egg on a giant indigo bush, which is its feed. Any of you who grow dill or fennel will recognize the black swallowtail caterpillar. There's our monarch egg now that he's a big boy. That tulip poplar that I planted without Paul knowing, tee-hee, is also the host plant for the eastern tiger swallowtail. So this becomes really important, right? We need to make sure we're providing plants that are native here. I'm going to just fly through here a bit just quickly so that we can save time for Q&A. This is, again, remember, 1, you do you. I'm just giving you best practices, so I'm not lecturing or slapping you on the wrist. And 2, keep in mind these are best practices, so weigh what you got to do. I love this. I stole it from nationalbutterflycenter.org, just their little meme. If your garden is not being eaten, you're doing it wrong. I very much agree with that. Pesticides. Basically, the short answer for our limited time here is really try to lay off of them wherever you can. I know it can be disconcerting when you look out and see aphids on your plants or those flowers. As hard as it can be, you can maybe get the hose out, give them a little spritz, then at least you're not poisoning things. But if possible, give it a couple days, maybe even give it a week, and you'll be surprised how quickly an army of ladybugs shows up and gorges on them. You can try things like liquid fence if you're trying to keep the bunnies and the deer away. We can talk more about this in the Q&A if you want. I have nothing against big box stores in principle, but you do want to be careful because they do tend to offer plants that have what are called neonicotinoids. And this is an English major trying to give you a chemistry lesson, but those are plants that have pesticides essentially like bred into them or grown into them. Like they're selling plants that if an insect bites it, the insect dies, which I suppose in theory you can see what they're trying to do. People don't want their plants to die, but herbicides, right? Same thing. Discontinue use whenever possible. And these are really scary too, as you know, if you've ever read the warning labels on Roundup, you don't want to get into that. There are some plants that pretty much without nuking them, you're never going to get rid of them. Consider removing sod manually as opposed to spraying it to having it killed. And again, just be mindful, like whatever we dump in our gardens, like it doesn't just go away. It gets into the water, it's around. This is that naughty list I mentioned, okay? There aren't many. This is the only time I will preach to you. You should not plant any of these plants. You are not a bad person if you plant these plants, or if you have in the past, but you should not plant these plants. Bradford pears are now illegal to sell. Tree of Heaven is the weed tree that grows anywhere you leave an undisturbed. Yep. Burning bush, this is where people want to throw things at me. It's really beautiful in the autumn. That's the really bright blood red, gorgeous bush. It is highly invasive and it is outcompeting and preventing many native plants from growing in our preserve. Okay. So lots of things there. Try not to be too tidy. So this is my permission that you get to be a little bit lazy. I call it strategic laziness, but mow your lawn less frequently. Keep that autumn cleanup a bit to a minimum. You want to keep in mind too that in that leaf litter there are moths and butterflies that actually overwinter there. So you can be disturbing them here. Here's what we do. And again, this is not everyone's aesthetic, and that's fine. You find your own way, but we leave everything up through the winter. And then I cut all that down usually in March or April. And all winter, I have birds scurrying in and out of here. I have little woodpeckers who find bugs inside the stems of those plants. I have bees that overwinter and hibernate there. Okay. So it can help to try to keep concern for appearances to a minimum. I know that's not possible for everyone, you know, especially if you have like a homeowners association, things like that. but really try to reframe. Okay, this looks messy to me and I want to tidy it. And I'll admit, I still, by March, I'm ready just to cut it all down. I want it clean. But I have to remember, like, this is really important and attractive to wildlife here. And really quick, before I fly through just about 20 pictures and then hush up, I will say if you take one thing away from this talk is this notion of landscaping for interactions versus only appearances. I love a tidy garden. I love a garden that looks a little wild with flowers. But what I'm also really coming to like is I think a garden has to have life. I have to be able to interact. I have to be able to hear birds singing. I have to see butterflies. I want to see bees, or else it's just not that great. Talk to your neighbors about it. Put up a sign. You can register your yard as a National Wildlife Federation garden. You can become a Monarch way station. It helps educate people so they just don't think, oh, Chad's like gone off his rocker and he doesn't care about his lawn anymore. Okay. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to rip out all your plants. As plants die and remove, you can add more. As I said, don't be afraid of failing. No one gets it right. Plants die. Ask questions about that. Like I saw when I made my list. Oh, a lot of these are non-native plants, so maybe they weren't set to be here. And just stop looking at or buying the garden magazines at Kroger, right? Just the work that goes into that. Plant native plants, like I said, you do not have to go home today and you should not tear out all of your grass. Do not do this. You don't have to tear out all your non-native things except these two. You do have an order, or you are a bad person if you don't know. I'm joking. And you don't have to do this in a weekend. Remember, I've been doing this for a decade. But start small. Again, save that back in your wallet. Putting in truly the tiniest patch of wildflowers. Dig out a 3 by 3 foot little hole around your downspout and tuck in a couple native plants. Scatter some seed, save your seeds. Let your plants stand through the winter and go out in January and harvest that seed. Free. If you have an existing garden bed, many of you said you're gardeners, you can again tuck in a few plants around them. If you grow vegetables, I've started putting like Virginia mountain mint and black-eyed Susan among my vegetables. And I get so many more bees, so many more veg here, okay? Get ideas, start walking around, get nosy, start peeking into people's fences, ask questions, yeah. I've introduced myself to complete strangers here, right? And Bowling Green's a really good gardening tip. Exactly, yes. Go talk to Cinda at Winter Garden. Take walks there. Go on her garden tours. Note what plants you're attracted to. Start thinking about where on your property you could do this. Generally, and I'm speaking very broadly, full sun to part sun is always the best, but there are also great shade-loving plants. Think about how you're using the space. So again, I get away with the garden I have because I don't have 5 kids under 5 running around there, although they would probably still be okay. And I have a dog who's more interested in sitting on the bench contemplating life and not a Great Dane or a greyhound who wants to run circles. But these are just a few pictures of some of my friends' gardens. Like these are some folks who live down in Findlay. They had very active grandchildren. They left a large green space, but they wanted a vegetable garden and they planted natives around the fence. Another had just closed in his porch, but made it a 3-season room. And so, hey, I'm going to plant some plants right out there so I can stare at them from the window. Make a sketch of this. Again, I'm just going to fly through here for now, but think about how you might design that. If you want things to look very formal and clean and neat, you want to plant in blocks, like giving those clear shapes. Or if you want it to look a little bit more wild, think of it as in drifts. How do your seeds get going? I'll share these with Clara. She can make these available. Get to know your soil. If you have never taken a bit of your soil to the OSU Extension office, you can. They can help get it tested, tell you what it's like. I will say, don't break your back. Gardening is exercise. I probably don't have to tell a lot of you that if you are gardeners. Keep in touch with your doctor. Stretch before, after. Get down on all fours, not bending over to weed, things like that. But also, a lot of these plants, and when you're wildlife gardening, I do not weed every week. I don't do it. I usually give about 2 good cleanups and weed a little bit. I water when it hasn't rained for about a month, and that's it. Do hire somebody if you really want your sod removed. Get a sod cutter, and the part I forgot was to hire someone to take all the sod away. Decided to do that. It is not a sin or wrong to plant directly into your lawn. My garden does not look like this now, but when it started, I just started dropping trees into places and planted little plants and then mulched over the grass, and it turned out perfect. This is an example of that. It tends to leave room for a lot of native violets. This is that driveway bed we started where we had removed the grass, mulched it. And of course, Paul got watering duty, God bless him. And 1 year later, we had this. And again, that could not have been more than probably $40 or $50 for plants and mulch. As I said here, you can treat this as, you're gardening for interaction. So I think of it as, okay, I might drop $50 or $100 across the summer on my garden. Anymore, that's 2 nights out to the movies. And this is more exciting than a lot of the movies I'm seeing. But put down cardboard, put down newspaper. Again, garden with natives. There are lots, and this is an incomplete list. There's so much longer. There are so many places these days you can buy native plants. This has improved so much just in the 10 years that I've lived in this town. You can get them in the spring, get them in the fall. There's just so many. I know you can load up right easily. Just, oh my goodness. These plants here are usually going for about $4 to $6 a plant. So, it's not $2, but it's also, you'll get so many free plants out of those. All right, so in summary, so I can save at least 5 minutes for questions here. Food, water, shelter, resources for offspring. These are what you need if you want to be a wildlife garden. Really, really, really try as best you can. Stop with the pesticides and herbicides. If you really have to do it, I'm fighting Canada thistle right now. Instead of spraying where it goes everywhere, you get it where you just have it in a bottle, you dip some cotton and you touch it to one plant. Then you're not killing everybody in the neighborhood. Get those native species, or excuse me, invasive species out of there. No burning bush. And try not to be too tidy. Start small, try to minimize disturbance as much as possible, dig as little as you can. Try to wait till April or May to clean up. Be patient, grow from seeds, shop those local native plant sales. And I have to admit, as you've seen in pictures, and I promise I'm not trying to sell you snake oil, it really does work. And really quickly, like when I put in just the first couple milkweeds, like it was almost that you would have thought we staged it. I had just planted this tiny little bed, dropped 2 milkweed plants in it, and before I could stand up, here comes this monarch, and she lays an egg right on the plant. It's crazy. This is a few years old, but I wanted to show you because this was about, again, maybe 6 years into my garden when it was still in the pandemic, it exploded in terms of how big it got. So it was still pretty minimal. And the following creatures all visited me just in that 1 year. American snouts, cabbage whites, cloudless sulfurs, common buckeyes, eastern tailed blues, eastern tiger swallowtails, that 8-spotted forester, the giant swallowtail, a hummingbird clearwing, meadow fritillary, monarchs, orange mint moss, orange sulfurs, peck skippers, Prometheus moths, red admirals, red spotted purple, silver spotted skippers, summer azures, variegated fritillaries, a common yellow throat warbler, the gray catbird who lives here, the rose-breasted grosbeak, a 12-spotted skipper, a yellow warbler, you can't see them because they're impossible to see in the trees, and then our friend the opossum who even brought us a milk jug that he found in the trash and loved to chew it each night. All right. But now, okay, so again, very quickly trying to land this plane, get out there and enjoy that. Pay attention to your plants, even if you only put 2 or 3 in. How are they growing? The fall is a great time to kind of do reconnaissance. What grew? How big did it get? Are things crowded? Do I need more plants? But more important, and this gets back to that interactions, this still needs to be a place for you. Like, yes, we're doing it for wildlife, but you need to get out there and enjoy it too. As I said at the beginning, it's a place for respite. It's a place for quiet. I encourage folks, and I try to do this myself, learn a new plant or a bug or an insect, something in your garden each week. Even if it just means learning the name of it, common or Latin. If that feels too much or like homework, then just promise yourself you'll have coffee out there each morning while it's warm. Or when you get back from work or running errands, give yourself 10 minutes. The now late poet John O'Donohue, I always love that little line from one of his poems, open up to all the small miracles you rush through. And there can be a lot, and I'm just gonna fly through this, but the garden is a great place all year long. There's never a time, like winter is not off season, but starting in spring, there are just all sorts of beautiful flowers, the birds, the Cape May warbler, just saw that this year. That was the very first time I'd seen one. Flowers on the pawpaws, a black-billed cuckoo. I didn't even know that was a real bird, and it lives in Ohio. Saw that this spring. Spring is always great. Then it becomes summer and things just get huge and everything's gangly in a beautiful way. The dog not doing any work in the garden. The frogs coming out. All of this, monarchs coming around. And it's always great when you've planted a monarch way station and you actually get a video of a monarch flying through, right? Isn't that fun? This one, if the volume, yep, oh, I think it's good. It'll take just a sec. So that was just a little trill of an eastern gray tree frog. The very first one we've ever had on our property was there just this summer while I was lying out in the hammock looking at the moon. And then, you know, summer becomes autumn, we're collecting all these beautiful things. And then winter comes, which more and more is becoming my favorite time in the garden because there's still plenty of birds. I don't have to do anything. I just get to go out and look at all the pretty scenery. And there we go. And last but not least, try your best not to be afraid of the wildlife you attract. And I say this as someone who until about age 20 had a just crippling fear of bees. And a mother who once jumped out of a car that was not in park when I and my brother were buckled into the back seat because a bee got in the car. 99, and I promise I'm not lying to you here, 99% of all the bugs and creepy, scary things in your garden couldn't give diddly about you. They truly are there. And those annoying things, like I hate yellow jackets. Horseflies are one of the few creatures I actually do kill when I see them, but those will be eaten by other creatures. And you also, no prudes in the garden because you're going to see murder, you're going to see predation, and you're going to see a little procreation. You know, this is a shame-free zone, but you'll see all sorts of things. You will learn that lightning bugs eat their mates, are actually really, really violent creatures. And there's a spider eating one of those yellow jackets that I didn't really care for, so good on you. And okay, I left you 4 minutes for questions, but I'm not going anywhere, so I'm happy to stay as long as you'd like. Thank you for your attention. Questions?
You had said you shouldn't trim your bushes in the fall, wait till spring. Now, I was always told just the opposite, because in the spring, there's